All right, today we're going to look at the two quarterfinals that I haven't talked so much about. This is mostly to delay Stuff and Sir Smoke's videos coming out because that match is still ongoing. So I figured I'd do some coverage of this Turdz Villalva game and then the decisive Yevon Delial game. So in this one, Turdz started in 1 with 8827. And this set has really been a lot of on starter, try to find something, an 8 or a 9 that they don't have covered that you have the recapture on. This Villalva does have coverage of, in fact, very good coverage of, but Turdz does have the recapture, and most of the cards in his hand are willing to see the game in this direction. He will have to find a use for 4893. But I would guess if we dump eval here, and we're not like using the computer to like judge everything, but I just bet most of the moves here tie for Villalva. Yeah. And you'll see yellow is all the moves that tie, and red is the moves that lose. This shouldn't be a very high pressure starter, but that doesn't mean that high pressure can't result shortly. I'm a fan of the weak corner, and what the solver will often tell you on weak corners is not many moves are losing. But often on turn 3 after your move, you can create difficulties if they didn't find the right way to clarify the position. So my real evaluation would be here there are 3 moves that lose, right? And then there's probably just a whole handful of moves that are going to be quite uncomfortable, and then there's a handful of moves that are solid here. So Villalva goes 1797 and 4. And I never like just giving a card like this. I think it's probably true that Turdz is going to be able to lock in, but even if we look at captures, right? If we force Turdz to lock in, what do we force out of him? Well, he probably doesn't want to go about it this way, right? And I guess we don't have the natural way to build out, right? Nor do we have a supernatural way to build out here. That 6578 controls so much. Here's something I've noticed in both the Suffs or Smokes match, but also this one. If you have the 6578 or the 7865, you want to start with the 6578 in 1. It just will control so much space that ends up being adjacent to it in 3 and 7. And if you had the 7865, right, the opposite of this card, you should be starting in 9. It just seems to work out so well every time and make a bunch of lines tricky. So actually, thinking about that, I like this starter. If you're thinking, how can I make the 6578 play such that they don't have any of the safeties they want? So Villalva just decides, I'm going to get rid of all these squares. And Turdz has a choice. Do you play 2 or do you play 7? Because you can grab safety in 7, but you can lock in a card in 2. Trying to think what my preference would be. I don't know. I'd probably go 2. Because I would be afraid that here I'd be behind in cards, and I wouldn't be sure if I was taking enough to get back in it. Right? Like, you do end up a little here. No, there's no plus, so there's nothing happening. It's too scary an 8. But I still have the 4893 in my hand, so I would expect this position to be, a draw, but not a draw I'm happy about. And in general here, yeah, I think I'm playing from behind, so I'd probably block 2. And by playing from behind, I mean you look at this and you see, that's a lot of losses and not many draws. Now, sometimes there are situations where you only have one good move, but it is very good, right? But here, there's nothing that strikes me as obvious or clearly powerful, so I don't think it's one of those spots. I'm not sure what card to put in 2, right? Do you want to, like, if you put something like this, which is the card you most want out of your hand, you're kind of just sacking it, right? You don't really have a good way to put that there. And so there is the question of which card to expend. I'd probably end up on 6578 now that their 9 facing down is out of their hand. But then they have choices between 8962 here and 6288 here, and none of which is too comfortable. I'd expect this to be, pretty balanced, right? When there's kind of a similar number of ties and losses, this is usually fairly balanced. Um, so, yeah, I think a somewhat tricky situation. I quite like Villalva's movement 4, right? Because Turdz can't attack it from 5 immediately, and you get rid of a card that isn't so good on the right. Like, if you think about lines like here, some kind of recapture, probably not that, some kind of recapture. Um, you can't play here because it's covered. So he finds a way to use a covered card. And as I think Seto pointed out, if Villalva plays in 5 here, this is really dangerous for Turdz. It's actually really difficult to find a tying line. I checked this the other day and I didn't actually do any of the calculation, so I don't necessarily know why, but maybe we can figure it out together. One thing is, it's just really hard for you to play up top because you get comboed, and even if your 9439 has some captures, 9349 dominates 9439 and you end up losing. This matchup is very bad for 9439, very good for 9349 Mont Blanc. So it's really easy, I think, to lose if you go in 2, and you don't have a natural way to do so. Like, it's not like this does any better, right? Oh, sorry, that doesn't get comboed, but it does get captured, and that's sufficient. I can count combos and captures. You can't go 2. If you go 8, well, Villalva's still threatening to go in 2, and this 8962 is suddenly going to be something that's really hard for you to take in 5. I believe the only tie is to keep your left-facing sweepers and go here, which makes some sense, right? This is a kind of weak card, and you don't have a way to get rid of it here that's comfortable. For instance, I think this loses. Like, something like this, right? Make sure, yep, that's all red. So, like, if you're gonna, you don't really, in this structure, like, the squares I check first are 2 and 8, and specifically, can I use my card that is the least sweeper potential? So my first 2 candidates are 4893 and 2 and 4893 and 8. That doesn't work. My next candidates are, do I have a setup in 3 or 9? And if I'm setting up, like say I'm setting up in 3, I care more about setting up a threat in 6 than 2, because 2 is inherently valuable once I've played 3. That locks in itself, it locks in 1, it's just a valuable square. So I need to have combo play in 6, right? If I'm looking for a setup move, I should be looking to set up 6 rather than 2. Anytime you make a square blocked in, that's inherently valuable. That's not the square you should be setting up, because that's the square the opponent wants to block anyway. The square you should be setting up is the square that is not inherently valuable. But the problem, I think, is they just block 2, and this actually isn't remotely real combo potential. So you quickly dismiss that, and then you end up on 6. And you kind of still got to get rid of that weak card, and so you try 4893 and 6. And I think this is not at all obvious because you're surrendering a lot of safety. This is actually a plus wall too. So there's a bunch of lines to check. One thing though is this plus wall, not that scary. If they go 8, we can take in a way that is safe to that kind of combo potential, and we shouldn't be in trouble here, right? Like there's no combo through 6, and so it's fine that we don't have a capture at the end. Then there's what if they go somewhere like here? That's pretty scary. And we just barely sneak out here when if they go 2, they only capture 1 card and we capture 1 back in 8. Yeah, that looks like the tie here. But then there's like, what if they start here? And there we need to rely on our 9439 to sweep the endgame. And it does. But this is tricky. This would have been really dangerous. It was a nice point by Seto. Not winning, but there isn't a win, but very dangerous. I also think this move is pretty decent, though not as good as Seto's. Villalva does go 6, 2, 8, 8, and 2. And Turdz finally finds a way to get 4, 8, 9, 3 out of his hand. And this is dangerous unless you can go 9, 3, 4, 9, and 5, right? If you can go 9, 3, 4, 9, and 5, everything is good. But the problem is, it's really scary to do so, right? You get comboed and you just lose. So, I don't know what the tie is here. I know there was a tie. Maybe we together can find it. So, 9, 3, 4, 9, and 5 looks like a loss. 8, 9, 6, 2, and 5. A move we may have remembered from Seto's idea. This is promising, because it sets up a serious threat in 6, right? If they do something in 8, even though we'll have a plus wall, it doesn't matter. This is going to flip too much. 6 is too big a threat, and there is never any combo back. So it kind of forces you to block 6. And then we can sneak something into 9, and we can tie. I think this is probably the tie. Yeah, it is. Now, there might be something else, but this is not a position we're going to win, right? Turdz is safety in 3 and 7. He has a card that's effectively safe in 2. So it's a 5-5 position where we're putting the first thing on the board that can be attacked, and our opponent also has last turn. This is very unlikely to have decisive potential in our favor unless we can force them to walk into just horrendous combo potential, and I don't think we can. Villalva ends up not finding the tie here. He hasn't been playing a ton recently, as far as I know. He goes in 8, and Turdz finishes it by keeping his 9-4-3-9 as sweeper. But I really like Villalva's starter in 4, and I think his move in 2 is still good enough to tie, though Turdz made it more dangerous than I expected, because I thought that was a pretty good move. But just not quite getting there on the calculation at the end. But the move in 2, right? The move in 2 led to a position against an incredibly strong opponent where Turdz could have been in a lot of danger, and I can tell you from the chat, Turdz spent a lot of time looking at this position, not finding the tie. Which is to say, Villalva's opening move here, I think ended up being very, very strong. And that's something we actually have seen quite a bit of on this rule set. Of these just playing next to a corner without taking it has led to a lot of pretty serious advantages. And that's what we're going to see in the next game, too. I'm going to split this into 2 videos just to delay the Stuff Smokes release. So today, we're just talking about Turdz Villalva, and next time, we'll talk about Villalva.